And we are live. We are live, going live. All right, we're live. Let's find our speaker and special guest of the day. This is always the fun part, huh? Okay, waiting for Nneka to sign on. How is everybody today? Friday, we made it. I didn't. I'm barely here, barely hanging on by a thread, but it's a good thing we're talking to a therapist, right? The last time I spoke to Nneka, she, like, even just her voice calmed me down, and I know she can't like therapize 30 people or more at once, but I think it's just going to be so helpful to hear what she has to say and her refreshing perspective on mental health, especially for moms, especially during a pandemic. And I know that I can be kind of like a Debbie Downer sometimes because I'm never going to say like, but look at the bright side, because that's just not who I am. I'm one of those people who's going to say, you know, let's sit with this. Let's sit with this feeling. And so I think it's really helpful to bring on people who can say, well, let's take this to a better place of healing. Okay, so that's me. That's my little thing. Nneka is wondering where I am. I'm on live. Let me write to her. There you is. Okay. And I want to invite her. Go live. She's coming. Hi.
Hi. All right, let me try to get this camera together.
Hey.
So shameful. You would think after this whole year, I would be like a magician
You would
with.
we would all be magicians with this, but it's still every time I go on, I'm like 90 years old. Like, is
Exactly, exactly. And you know what's so funny? I always think that I'm far enough, and then I rewatch it, and I'm like, your nose is
it's
right
just,
there.
it's just your nose on IG Live.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I was just telling viewers that it's going to be so refreshing to hear from you, because when it's me, I'm like, hey guys, it really sucks now, doesn't it?
I doubt that. I doubt that. I haven't had an opportunity to join you on what do you call it? Monday nights as of yet. But I'm sure it's amazing. I do refer and recommend this platform to almost all of my patients.
Oh, thank you.
Just because it's one of the few spaces that I believe are actually honest
Thank you so much.
about about parenthood and parenting and living in relationships. And it's not just this like, you know, always commercial of us running through flowers with our children in
We're,
glee.
we're stomping on dead flowers.
I think so at this point.
Favorite thing.
At this point. So I saw a lot of the questions. I read all of the questions, obviously, and they were so good, but they were so layered.
So late.
And so, excuse me?
So late. Just agreeing with you.
Yeah, I really wanted people to recognize that there will be no one answer, that's going to fit each person's particular situation, especially without knowing the details and the background and things like that. And so I really want for everyone to take my advice the same way you would take anyone else's, right? This is not therapy.
Mhm.
Take what holds and throw away the rest.
Exactly. And
Sense.
to folks before you got on, that you're not here to give therapy to every different perspective.
Right.
And before we really kick off, I was hoping that you could introduce yourself formally to the community.
So good afternoon. Happy Friday. My name is Nneka Symister. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in New York City. I've been a clinician for a long time, over 10 years, so I don't like say my age. Um, but a long time. I work specifically now with couples and women who are suffering from perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And that's really important for me to be specific about because I think there's a lot of conversation about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And there's such a range of emotions that happen throughout the entire pregnancy and not just after birth, you know, during pregnancy and prior to pregnancy and planning for pregnancy. And so I really just kind of help women, couples, anyone who wants to grow their family and kind of navigating that to the best of their ability.
I love that you're also including the perinatal period in part of this, because there's still a lot that I think people don't understand around the disorders that you encounter when you're pregnant.
When you're pregnant, I mean, just even thinking about getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I think we've all been socialized to believe, and I'm hoping it's changing, the idea behind it's changing, but we've been all socialized to believe that like pregnancy happens like this. Our bodies do this. It's really natural. It's really easy. And the reality is that it's not really easy, you know, and everyone's path is really different and you can't know every single thing. And so I know for a lot of parents, they read the books, they do the research, and then they're still surprised. And so I really try to tell everyone you will be surprised,
Mm-hmm.
right? Although you're pregnant or planning for at least 10 months, right? You have no baby 1 hour and then you have a baby the next. There's nothing more shocking than that.
Right.
And so I really think, and don't get me wrong, postpartum is extremely difficult, but it is extremely difficult just going through the pregnancy and just thinking about pregnancy. I have a lot of patients who are just afraid of the thought of getting pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
right? What will that do to their bodies? You know, the fear of their bodies just ripping apart. If you have fear of needles or anything. And again, and that's someone that may not have had any trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Now you ask who's had some trauma, you know, had surgeries in the past, things like that, didn't have good experiences around their cycle in general, right? Pregnancy will look very different for that person.
We've had so many mothers in our community who have had been pregnant and had a baby during COVID and have dealt with so much of these stressors in complete isolation. And it's just been an experience unlike any other for a lot of these moms, you know, not having the usual access to, you know, friends, a mom group, you know, it's constantly getting to see a doula, easily accessing their doctors, bringing their partners with them. I think
Oh, yeah.
added to a lot of,
Isolation.
yeah.
It's interesting though, right? Because what I tend to speak to people about is what would you have done if you weren't in quarantine, right? Would you have taken advantage of all the things that you would like to take advantage now? Is it just about the option, right? There's some real reality, like you said, going to the doctor's appointments alone, right? To me is the most heartbreaking thing. And for many reasons, even if it's amazing news, you hear things differently, you know, from your partner. It keeps your partner as an outsider in some ways, right? Where you're kind of relaying messages. But on another note, I think there are some unrealistic expectations that people have because we're in quarantine that they wouldn't have if we weren't, if that makes any sense. And so you talk about isolation with the village, right? You know, not being able to have parents come or friends come and different things like that. But if you speak to parents before quarantine, they would tell you their friends didn't come and their parents didn't come and they didn't utilize these same resources the way they could have, right? And so I think there's just like a magnifying glass on what we don't have access to, that we may not have utilized anyway, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I want to go back into that because you and I were talking about this the other day. the village and how we don't take advantage of it. But before we go back into that, you had a bigger question for me that really stopped me in my tracks, which was, what are your expectations of yourself right now? Because,
Yeah.
The larger umbrella over this is expectation, because so much of our feelings are around guilt, what we're not doing right now, how we haven't measured up as mothers and as workers or spouses and partners and, all the different labels. And then you asked me, well, what were you expecting?
Right. You decide the measurement, right? So what were you expecting? I think what you said to me was, I'm not being as productive as I can be at work. I'm not doing all the, things that I can be doing with the children. And I was like, well, what does that look like? Were you completing all your tasks at work prior to quarantine and having nothing left to do the next day? Were you this parent who never felt guilt prior to the quarantine, right? Like this expectation to work at a 10 at all times when you never did, which is fine,
Yeah.
right? Some days I'm a 10, some days I'm a 2, some days I'm a 5. And then I start over again the next day. But I decide, the expectation, right? What is my goal? A lot of that is because you're home. People associate home with having free time.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, you do not have extra free time, right?
No.
You're working. And so I hear people say, well, I'm so distracted when I'm home. Even let's put kids aside. Let's say you have childcare. Let's say kids are in school. Let's say. We know they're not, but let's say. And you're working from home. People will say, well, I'm not as productive because I may stop and wash dishes, or I may be distracted by this or distracted by that. And then I say, well, if you were in the office, don't you stop and talk to coworkers?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you stop and get coffee? Don't these same pauses happen anyway in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But we believe that because we're at home, a lot of people believe that their employers believe they're not working as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are actually working harder
Oh, yeah.
from home, I think, than they would if they were in the office. And then you add childcare. You add children. You add children of different ages, different grade levels, different schools, right? So you may have someone working at home full time, someone doing, some days home, some days at school. How do you manage all of that with one person? Right? The best way you can.
Yeah.
Right? The expectation for people to get up, and then don't get me wrong, you should have a skeleton schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I try to wake up at the same time every day. I try to put in some systems, and I know I'm going to go back and forth some things we spoke about, but I try to put in some systems that will help me identify the start of my day from the end of my day, since I'm in the same space 24/7. So for me, it's putting on my work clothes, right? For me, it's putting on my blouse, and at the end of the day, and I'm going to be honest, just my blouse. I have on sweatpants, okay?
No, pants.
Right. So dressing, I mean blouse and earrings, right? So put on my blouse, and at the end of my work day, then I take that off, right? So that's rather than a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people have been utilizing as the signifier of the end of the day, right? Like now is my downtime. Finding something else to start and end your days. For a lot of people, it was the commute.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And you don't have that commute anymore.
Yeah, no one's on the subway now, and no one's driving home from a place, and there's no separation. So,
Right.
I mean, I know with my friends and a lot of the moms on mom group, it's a glass of something, or in the absence of a workout or going out to dinner with friends, people are doing other things that maybe aren't as healthy, like binge shopping,
Oh yeah, I actually read an article about that this morning. About people who are just spending this online shopping. I mean, and I fell into that in the beginning of quarantine, right? Amazon and I became like super close, right? And it was things I saw your chat this morning of what are things you regret purchasing, and I was thinking about that, and I'm like, everything. I didn't need anything. I didn't need any of these things, right? But just trying to find something to do. It really speaks to, especially if you're in New York, this kind of fast pace, having to have to do something at all times. Just sitting still feels lazy. Sitting still doesn't feel good. Um, just having to do something,
Yeah.
even if it's shopping, right? Something I'm in control of. Somewhere my needs are being met because in other parts of my life I have no control. I can't plan for the future. I don't know what's going to look like. I don't know if the kids are going back to school. I don't know if you're a single parent, how you're going to utilize your help. That depends on people getting vaccines. Who
Mm.
wants to get vaccines, right? Not everybody's on board, unfortunately. There's so many moving parts. So people tend to go to where they can control. They can control shopping in some ways, or the glass of wine, right? And so I know we spoke about how does someone identify when it's a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would usually suggest for everyone is to just try not to do it for a week.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot accomplish that, then you might look into doing some more research around that.
I like that measurement.
Yeah, just go for a week. If you can't go for a week without having that glass of wine or shopping for the thing you don't need,
Uh-huh.
right? If you can't allow it to sit in the cart for 7 days,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't, you're just so impulsive, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say do some research around that. I
Yeah.
wouldn't automatically say there's a problem, but you might be in the beginnings of a problem.
You don't have to go to judgment, but you may want to go to exploration.
Yeah, definitely, right? Especially if you're in a space where you're going back into society, right? Like the
Mhm.
kids are going back into like summertime camp and things like that, or you're returning to work. This idea that it's going to go from 0 to 100, you're setting yourself up,
Yeah.
right? So if you're drinking every day at 5, you know, you don't want to do that Friday and think Monday comes and you're just going to be good. Or you don't want to figure it out
Yeah.
that way, right? So I tell people start little by little, shifting and seeing the changes. The same way if you're returning back to work after maternity. I
Mm-hmm.
was just having a conversation with someone about this yesterday. You don't go from being home 24/7 on Friday and then you're out 8 hours on Monday. I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds harsh, right? And so I say maybe do some drop off for 2 hours, half a day, right? Or maybe depending on who your person is,
Mm-hmm.
going out for an hour, going out for 4 hours somewhere else. I mean, it's nice now. You can go sit in a coffee shop, you can go to a park, just so that you can handle being away, right? And how can you sit with that? So maybe starting with 3 hours and 4 hours and things like that.
So how do you recommend that we approach this easing back into society? Because I know we have a lot of members who are feeling very anxious about life going back to normal in terms of having to like face people again and go into crowds and see people on a regular basis, or having to go back to an office, right? And dealing with those like social interactions that we haven't had to deal with in a long time.
It's almost like going back to like the first day of school, right?
Mm.
What do I wear? Can I fit my clothes? What do I do? Little by little. Again, don't shell shock yourself,
Mhm.
right? I'm not going to go from being home all day to a concert.
Yeah.
That sounds crazy to me, right? I'm going to start out with my close friends, my circle, maybe meeting them outside, maybe then going inside,
Hmm.
for a few hours, little by little. Most offices are coming back staggered. Most people are not going 0 to 100, right? And so figuring that out, how does that feel for you? But really trusting your own instincts, doing what's best for you. There are some people I know who say, no matter what, I'm never taking my mask off. I don't care if we don't have a mandate. I'm going to wear a mask forever. Some people are feeling uncomfortable about touching, right? Hugging. What does that look like? You're super aware of your body in a different way now than you were before, right? Because you're not being touched the way you were before. I mean, before I would just hug anybody, honestly, right? And now if someone touches my shoulder, I'll probably just be
Yeah.
shocked,
Weird.
right? Because we're just so over aware. But do what feels best for you. That's what I say. Don't feel rushed because other people are going back out. Do what's best for you.
But when you see, and someone brought this up in a question, it can sometimes feel isolating when you see other people leading like a post-COVID life and you're not ready for that. And so maybe you feel like, is there something wrong with you?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of FOMO, right? I think people are seeing that. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're thinking that, there's almost never anything wrong with you. You have to do what makes you feel safest, right? Because your consequences are your own.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I may feel envious that maybe someone's out in a group, but I'm not going to do anything. I have to think about the lesser evil. Am I going to go to this place where while I'm there the whole time, I feel afraid? I wish that I wasn't. I'm wondering if I followed all the precautions, or am I going to do what feels best for me?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in those spaces, really checking in with yourself. What is the lesser evil for me, right? Is it being there or and being uncomfortable, or is it waiting? What makes the most sense?
Yeah, I
But
saw.
what else more? I mean, in isolation, we've been isolated physically,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for many people, they haven't really been isolated. Does that make sense? Because of IG lives and Zoom parties and all the things
Yeah.
that people, I'm sure, are tired of at this point.
Yeah.
It's really being in someone's presence, being able to read the nonverbal cues again,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm hoping that people will be more present now than they were before,
Me too.
you
And
know.
phones, because we've been staring at our phones this whole time.
I
But
know the last thing I want to do is be out with my friends and be on my phone.
I want to stare. Want to look at real faces, not screen faces, and not my own face. Just been like staring at my face, like in every interaction, and just like, can you just block this out? Like, it really does something to you. It like makes you crazy. You're not meant to.
And also doing something for yourself as an individual, right? I mean, this last year and a half, if you have children, it's been about your children,
Yeah.
with partnerships. There's obviously been an increase in everything. Um,
Partner.
Divorce, partnerships have been extremely difficult during this time because there are no distractions. And so we talked a little bit about having these cracks in
Mm-hmm.
our relationships that are now highlighted because we're not distracted by friends or work or other activities. And so now it's right in our face and we have to deal with it. And we are not, and we're being forced to deal with it, right? It's one thing if you have intention to deal with something, but when you're being forced, you may not be ready. And so there's no changes. I saw a question someone asked yesterday and said, I'm having difficulty communicating with my husband, but the more I communicate, the more difficult it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, of course, right? Because the communication style hasn't changed, right? So we're not communicating great. We're doing that same dance every single day.
Uh-huh.
Of course, it's gonna get worse, right? And so the question that was asked is what to do, and my first thing was like, change one thing.
Hmm.
Nothing changes if nothing changes, right? And so communication is like a dance, the way you communicate, especially with a partner you've been with for some time,
Yeah.
right? And so just shift, say something different than you would normally say. Literally, one sentence could shift the conversation,
Wow.
right? And so I was thinking about, when you get into arguments that are not about anything,
Yes.
right? So things like, can you do such and such for me? And the person's like, why are you using that tone? I'm not using a tone. You have an attitude. No, you have an attitude. We walk away, right? It's not really about anything. In a situation like that, when someone says, why are you using that tone? Why do you have an attitude? Maybe I would say instead, what did you hear me say?
Hmm.
That's it, right? I'm not saying that you're not gonna still be defensive, right? I'm just saying just shift one thing, right? And maybe that will shift the conversation because it's like a dance. Go left instead of going right.
Mm-hmm.
It will shift everything. But to expect that it will be better because you're continuing to talk every day, you're
Yeah.
talking the same way, that's triggering the issue,
Wow. Okay.
right? That's one thing. And then the second thing I would suggest for that particular anyone in these relationships is what is your ask? That's what I ask all of my couples. What is your ask? What do you want from this conversation? right? And let that lead the conversation. Because a lot of times we're just, listening to respond. There's no goal, there's no end goal, there's no compromise. It's just I'm listening to respond to you and be right, and you're doing the same, and then we're walking away.
There was a question also from a mom who was wondering, how do you know if it's just like normal COVID related problems in our relationship, or if this is like a really bad problem? Like we need to, like our relationship is in trouble.
Well, did you have this problem prior to COVID? That's the first question I would ask. We usually know the answer to that. We are the experts in our lives, right? And a lot of times we're like, I'm not sure, but we do know. Okay. Now, it may not be as big of a problem because you were distracted. And so I would say more than likely, this was an issue that was there prior to COVID, right? And it doesn't mean that your relationship is over, but it may mean that you may need a third party, someone just to help navigate the conversation with you, right? I'm never going straight from zero to divorce, Sometimes it just means that maybe you need someone else there to referee this conversation or this pitfall that you happen to be in. But that person knows the answer to that. I promise you.
Yeah. I want to go through a couple more of the questions that people submitted, and also invite people who are on to submit questions here.
Yeah, I saw some questions.
We covered a couple of these. This is related to what we're talking about. How do you bring up the unfair balance of emotional labor between you and your partner? And I guess on top of that is like, how do you get them to understand the labor that you now are taking on as a mother?
Yes, I saw a question about that. How do I let I think this particular person said that their spouse may be out the home. I don't know if they're working out of town or something like that, but how do you let a spouse recognize all the work that you're doing? Mm-hmm. One, I'll say this, give them some of the work, right? Mm-hmm. We tend to hoard the work and then resent the fact that we hoard the work, right? And so I had this conversation with a mother recently, and she said to me, I don't like the way that my husband does A, B, and C, right? And so I don't feel comfortable leaving my child with him. And so it's more of a burden. So I never get a break because I always need a backup. And my response was, then you work it out with him. You don't alleviate him from the responsibility because he cannot. He may not be able to because he doesn't spend as much time as you. And so when you find your partner being frustrated, you walk them through it, right? Sometimes your spouse comes home, they play. Sometimes, they play with the babies, whatever, and they put them to bed. And so again, they don't see all the work, right? Maybe on the weekend, maybe there's a day that you leave them with your partner.
What a concept.
I know, maybe 4 hours, right? And I've heard my mother say, listen, it's more work when I return. The house is a mess. It's, whatever. Or things are not done the way I do them. It doesn't have to be done the way you do them. They just have to get done. You have to trust that your partner has the skill set to do the work, and you have to delegate the work, right? It's really up to you, right? It's the same thing with the village. People say, well, everyone was around during my pregnancy and no one really helps. And I'm like, did you call? We tend to set up boundaries for other people. You're not responsible for other people's boundaries, right? And so let someone else tell you they can't do it, and more than likely they won't. They may say, I can't do it today. I can do it tomorrow, and you come up with a plan. But a lot of times I've heard people say, oh, I don't ask because that person is busy. Oh, that person has children too. They have a lot on their plate, and I'm always like, well, find a person that's doing nothing all day, who has all the time. There's no one, right? And so you have to reach out to people and say, this is what I need, and also recognize that what you need looks different in different parts, in different stages. right? So as the world opens up, and people are starting reaching out to their villages, I hear people say, well, my mother-in-law or, whoever wants to come and help, and they want to come and they want to hold the baby. And I'm like, that's the least thing that you need help with. People who say they want to come and hold the baby, that's not where all your struggles lie, right?
A good
Right? It's like, can you cook a meal for me?
Yeah.
Can you wash the dishes? Can you do some laundry? Can you do the things that didn't stop once I had this new responsibility, right? Or if I'm homeschooling, someone doing something else, right? It's never just like, can you hold the baby for me? Which I don't know why everyone thinks that's the thing to do, but it's not.
And we have a
But utilizing your resources.
And we have a fantasy of people calling us, right? And being like, what can I do? How can I help?
And it happens sometimes, right? But not as often and never when you need it. Because people are not psychic.
Why not?
Right? I know, right? But I mean, think about yourself. How many times have you had conversations with your friends and you've said to them, why didn't you call? Why didn't you let me know? And they say, oh, because you were busy and I knew you were, you know what I mean? We do that all the time. And I'm just like, use your resources. Let someone else set their own boundaries on how full their plate is and things like that. It's not really your responsibility to do that in any space, quite frankly.
That's a huge thing to internalize. What you're saying is that it's not our job at someone else's boundary or limit. They are for themselves. And I'm seeing someone wrote here, that's the hardest thing for me, asking for what I need. I guess the fear is that the other person will say no.
Yeah. Yeah, they might say no. And then you continue to go down your list and you find another resource. To me, I would prefer a firm no than be in limbo with what ifs, right? I could have had help. Maybe if I did this, maybe if I didn't do that, it's much better to say, this is no, I can't, move on.
Yeah.
Right? Because what is the biggest fear? The person says no. No one has ever died because someone told you no. You'll be fine. It'll be disappointing, of course, right? But then now that's not your person for that. And most people never, first of all, most people can't even say no. Most people don't even know how to say no. That's one, right? So it's funny how most people don't know how to say no, but then most people are fearful of hearing no. So I'm like, who are all the people saying no if no one wants to say no? That's right. So it just doesn't make much sense to me. But no, most people will say, I can't right now. And this is what I can or cannot do, right? And we talked about this, understanding the roles in your village, right? And so I know that if I think about my village, and it doesn't have to be large, you just need a few good people. I know the person who's going to pick up the phone 2:00 in the morning, and I know the person who's going to run over here and help me with my kids, but I also know the person who's like, I have no time for that, but I can send you this amount of money to pay for whatever. You have to figure out who's who. Right? I'm not going to call the person who goes to bed every night at 7 as the person who's going to be my, because I know they never pick up the phone.
Right.
That's not my person. So really figuring that out. Also, what's the lesser evil, right? I can be really afraid that this person says no, or I cannot have my needs met.
Right.
What's most important for you? And a lot of the questions are going to be, what is the lesser evil? It really, very rarely is ideal and not ideal.
Right. There's no perfect.
No.
There's a question here that says, how do we get our partners to speak or listen from a place of openness instead of defensiveness?
Oh, well, honey, that's the $1 million question for all women. We can only ask. We cannot make anybody listen to us from a place of openness. You can do it yourself and practice that in front of them and ask for that, but we can't make anybody do that. I think, just to go back to the question around how do I let my partner understand all the work that I do, it's also explaining all that you do. A lot of times I hear when the partners call and say, what are you doing? Nothing. Just feeding. Right? As if just feeding is not a lot of work. Right? Why would you say just feeding? I'm feeding. That's like a lot. And as we have kids, especially more than one, kids feed differently, depending on their stomach issues and whatever, you have to sit them up a certain way and do certain things. And there are things that you figure out over time that your partner who's not with you doesn't get, right? So explaining those things, like I'm not better because I'm the mother, right? I'm better because I'm here 24/7 and I've done this and I've learned what works. And for that reason, you should listen to me. And for that reason, I should be able to guide you on what's best for this child.
I wonder if there's also a fear of, if you were to tell your partner what you actually are doing when and how hard it is when they call, if eventually they're just like, well, all she does is complain, or like.
Yeah, but would that be a fair statement? Because then I would say, all I did was complain since I had a baby. How long have you known me? So what if that's true? What if in the first 3 months I literally just complained? But if you've known me for 10 years, who cares in 3 months? What's 3 months?
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's the same thing with the pandemic, right? People are like, everything has stopped in the last year. Yes, it's been a horrible year. Plus, we'll probably have another year, which before it becomes some type of normalcy. But what is 2 years in your lifespan? Right? We have to see this as temporary.
Mm-hmm.
So, and are you complaining or are you asking for assistance? Or are you literally saying what you're doing?
Right.
Right? So I'm not going to minimize that something is difficult when it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And then be resentful that someone doesn't understand that it's difficult. And I haven't shared that it's difficult.
Mm-hmm. Right. Scooping poop off the floor is not enjoyable.
No, it's not. And as much as you love your children and they're cute and cuddly and sweet, especially when they're newborns, they don't talk to you. They're pretty boring. They're lovely, but they're boring, right? And so a lot of times you're not talking to anyone, just sitting there in your thoughts, right? Which are usually like all over the place. Well, this is why, just to talk about having these conversations with your partner, these are the conversations you really should be having prior to giving birth. And so while my mothers are pregnant, I usually say to them, what conversations have you had with your partner about roles? Because your roles will change, even if it's just temporary. You have to talk about that. If you were the person who were responsible for, let's say, traditional roles per se, you kind of took care of the home. You may not be able to you will not, sorry, let me rephrase that. You will not be able to maintain that with the newborn, right? And so you should say that right away. We're going to need some help. I know we agreed to this set of responsibilities, but it's going to have to shift. Let's talk about that. And you'll be surprised how many people just assume that their partners are on board, and then they have the conversation and they're not. And not because they don't want to, they just have a different idea of what it looks like. And so these are really the conversations you should be having. What are you going to help with? Where can I rely on you? How are our roles going to change? Same thing with your village. I'll call up my village. Hey, you know that you're a part of my village. Can you be my person? If I really have a breakdown and I really need someone here with me, can you be that person? And the same, even if in the midst of COVID, I told people that, yeah, it's very scary. But again, what's the lesser evil? If I'm having a really bad nervous breakdown and I just can't pick up off the floor, I'm going to call someone.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is much more dangerous in that particular situation.
The thing is, sorry, I think so many people didn't call somebody. I think that there are just so many moms that because of the fear around COVID, they dealt with the mental breakdown alone.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Because the fear outweighed the suffering that they ended up having to endure. So I wonder if someone had given them permission and said, it is worse for you to suffer through this alone. Call your
Worse.
if like a if a doctor or, psychotherapist said, I need you to actually see and have, I wonder if that would have made a difference for moms.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm hopeful that moms remember and just for clarity, when I say moms, any parent, right? I'm really hopeful that any parent can understand that. And this sounds really bad what I'm going to say, but it's not, and I mean it. You are more important than your children. And you are, and mostly because you take care of them. And so if you're not well, I can't see how you can be thinking that you're doing the best job,
Hmm.
right? If you're not taking the best care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not sleeping and I'm not eating right and I'm drinking and I'm hungover and I'm doing all these things, I may be present enough to get them fed and housed and get them to school, but I'm also more irritable. And so I don't have a lot of patience, and you need a lot of patience for children. Um, and I'm not seeing things as quickly. I may be a little fuzzy in the mind and things like that. And so it's counterproductive, this idea of everything for them and nothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't, it's not going to give you what you think it is, and it's not sustainable.
Right.
So your mental health has to be more important.
There's a question, I don't know if you want to go in this direction.
Sure.
The sexual expectation.
Oh,
She said, how about the difference in sexual expectations now that you care for and nurture 3 tiny human beings?
I know, it's super crazy. So this strange thing happens, right, when you have a newborn. Generally, men tend to become more attracted to you. And it's like the
Men
whole thing.
or other partners?
Huh?
Your own partner or other partners?
Your own partner. It's really weird. So this thing happens where you don't feel great. You're out, you're just feeding. You just feel like, your body doesn't belong to you, right? You're not really in your body. You're just, again, your body's changing, right? Your hormones all over the place, and you just feel like a walking, talking bottle, right? If you're breastfeeding or pumping or whatever. And while you're feeling this way and not attractive and not great and all these things and just exhausted, your partner is like, eyes are bulged out and tongue is hanging over because you look like the sexiest thing to them. It's the strangest thing that happens. And so their sex drive increases when yours decreases. And it's a biological thing. I wish I could make some sense out of it. But it's important for you just to say, like, can you imagine feeding a baby all day? And I'm going to get a little graphic, but like, you're breastfeeding all day, and then you think that I want you to come kiss on my breast, like an hour later. Like, the last thing I want is someone else on my breast.
For sure.
It's just, yeah, right? It's the last thing I want. And that's just about having a conversation and saying, like, this will pass, right? But just give me some time. Like, to have the expectation that if I'm working, some people are still working, that I have this first shift, then this second shift with my children, and then now this third shift with my husband. It's just, it is.
Yep.
Right? And just having a conversation about it, instead of just saying, no, I'm not interested, really explaining, like, this is what's happening from my body, this is how I'm feeling. I don't feel whatever it is, right? My libido is low right now, that might change and give me some time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's this strange thing. And they get a little bit jealous, actually, that this baby has access to your breast that they don't. It's very funny. But it's expected. That's another thing I tell women to tell their spouses while they're pregnant. You don't see it now, but you're going to think I'm super hot as I have this baby. And I will not be checking for you at all. Okay? So just know it's not personal, it's biological, and it'll pass.
Do you have like a checklist of things you should talk to your partner about before you have a baby together?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me see. I think the most important thing I would say is just your roles. What are your roles in the relationship? And how will it change? Right? Because again, I think the expectation is for that to remain the same. because it was agreed upon at some point, either spoken or unspoken. Hopefully it's spoken.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to talk about that again. And you should talk about that again after your child turns a certain age. And these should be conversations that you're having ongoingly, right? This idea that we have an agreement that stays the same in the entirety of our relationship makes no sense. So I would say roles, expectations. What are the expectations from you as a parent? What are your expectations from them as a parent? People tend to talk about the big things like religion and how they're going to raise their children and things like that, which are really meaningful conversations, but they don't talk enough about the day to day, like what it would actually look like day to day, right? I've heard mothers say, no, my partner and I are going to switch every other night and do night shift. And then they speak to their partner and they're like, no, I work in the morning. I'm not doing that shift. Right? And then that person's shocked. You don't want to have that conversation when you're exhausted and feeding every 2 hours and don't have patience.
Right.
That's not the time that you want to hear your partner say, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
If you have that conversation early enough, then maybe you can say, okay, then what's the alternative? Oh, well, your mom will stay here, or maybe we'll get a night nurse or whatever. Or weekends is going to be your time then because I need time. It's really important for the parent, the mom, the mother, mostly who tends to be home, to carve out time for themselves. I hear a lot of that, right? The envy of the other partner. They're still going out to work. They get to communicate with other people, and just get a break. And then you don't get one.
So,
Right?
so what I hear from a lot of moms is like, okay, time for myself. I only have an hour. What can I do with a goddamn hour?
More than you can do with no hour. That's the thing. So someone will refuse an hour for 5 and don't know when they're going to get 5. So then you're going to wait more time with no time off to get this special time that now I'm sure you're going to fill up with things to do that you've been wanting to do that you could have been doing with this 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So sometimes I tell people, take 10 minutes. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have no time for yourself, an hour is a lot, right? And it doesn't have to be a productive hour, right? So people tend to say, I want to get a manicure, or I just want to go out with friends or whatever. And those things are important. But sometimes it means just closing a room door and just not talking to anyone, and not having anyone call your name or say mommy or anything for an hour, right? I even say, even if it's just sitting on your toilet like this with headphones on, just disappearing somewhere, take it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not ideal, but take it. You have to take your breaks.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes, and again, this goes back to what you said about expectations, like setting your own expectations. If I'm feeding, let's say, my children, people say, well, while they're eating, let me go wash these dishes, let me, do something else. Sometimes just sit down. Who's rushing you to do these things?
Right.
They're going to get done. They will get done eventually, but you have to put your peace of mind first.
Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. It's hard. And it's hard to sit still when you're already being forced to sit still. Right. So it's like, how much more time do you want me to take for myself, right? Like, COVID has given us more time than we need for ourselves. But it's different from when we're forced to do something and when we're choosing to do something.
Yeah. And it doesn't really feel like it's for yourself. You're in your house. We were in our houses, but we weren't spending it in the way that we really wanted to.
No, not even close. Not even close. This idea, what's so funny? Prior to people being off and having to be home, we had this idea, if I had free time, I would do this, I would color coordinate this, I would like all the things, right? And then we have the free time and people are like, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that with my time. I think this is a great opportunity to decide how you want to reintegrate. What do you want your life to look like? Do you want it to go back to the fast pace where you weren't really present before? Really using this time to decide, one, how do I want to show up for myself? But what type of parent do I want to be moving forward? What are the expectations I've put on myself in the past? Are they realistic? Can I maintain them? This is a really good time to just think about yourself as an individual and not just the parent.
Or think of yourself in terms of other people and what you do to serve them.
I mean, we wear several hats,
Yeah.
right? So it's, I can be a mom, I'm someone's daughter, I'm someone's friend, I'm someone's partner, I'm an employee, I'm all these hats,
Mm-hmm.
and they all feel something very different in us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this idea that your kids are going to give you the same satisfaction that your work does, it's unrealistic. Or that your partner would give you the same love that your parents do is unrealistic. They all have their own place. And kind of figuring that out, what that looks like in this new pie chart of your life, what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not. I remember my life was so busy. It was like either like networking thing after work or working till 7 o'clock and only seeing my kids for an hour, just like running around all the time. It looked great in pictures, on
Right.
Instagram. But I was exhausted and like not spending enough time with my kids. So, in that way, it's been a gift to be able to understand how I can recalibrate. But on the other hand, I am anxious about the expectation that the world is going to have. I'm like, oh, good, things are back. So, Alexis, are you coming to this thing? Are you going to go to my event? Are you going to support me in my blah, 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 whatever? There's going to be, there isn't.
That's a good question. There is an expectation. So what are you planning on doing?
Got to figure out how to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll say, when I can, I will.
Yeah.
And when I'll let you know.
Oh, does anybody else have any questions? A classy little mama of three. She's like, I have questions, but I want to give other people a chance. That's nice. I mean, we have to end, I guess, in a bit, but I guess I would love advice for moms with PPD. How do you get help when you can't go anywhere? And I guess it's kind of this related to like, what does care look like when you can't?
What does care look like? And PPD is postpartum depression. So when you say, I saw that question, you said, where can I go? What that implies is that if you go somewhere and get something, that depression will go away. And with PPD, specifically with that diagnosis, it really has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's very similar to any type of depression where you can't find joy in the places that you would normally find joy. And so that wouldn't change whether you were in your home or out of your home. I would suggest that you get some help with a clinician to really kind of walk you through that part of your life.
That's a
So
real.
that's how
It's not something you can like take baths and meditate on necessarily.
not depression, right? There are feelings of sadness and loneliness and isolation that will be helpful. Luckily with the weather change, you can go to the parks. If you live in New York City, the museums open back up and there are things to do outside. Thank God for rooftops, right? So there are things to do, but for specifically depression, I don't think it's an inside outside thing.
I think that's the problem that a lot of us are having is like, are we depressed or are we just sad because of this really long purgatory?
It could be just that. Yeah. So I literally just posted something about the difference between anxiety and an anxious diagnosis, right? And I think that people forget that we have this range of emotions, and the moment we feel something that's negative, we make it into a diagnosis, right? So if I feel sad or I feel displaced or I feel isolated, I'm depressed. And it's like, well, no. Diagnoses usually are not triggered by one thing, if that makes any sense, right? And so, where's this feeling coming from? If I can tell you I'm feeling isolated because I am not out and I'm not doing the things that I need to do, then I just feel isolated, right? And I know what can happen to change that. That's not a diagnosis necessarily. Well, first of all, in order for things to be a diagnosis, most of them, not all, have to happen consistently for over 3 months, 3 to 6 months, right? Now, again, we're in quarantine. If you said to me, the world opened back up, I did all the things that I love to normally do, and I still find that no joy, then there we go. Then we can look into a diagnosis. But I don't think everyone is suffering from a diagnosis of anxiety or depression or things like that. I think we're just anxious,
Hmm.
because we don't know the future and we can't plan like we normally do. And as humans, we plan, right? And we're constantly thinking about what's next. And we can't do that. And so, of course, you're going to have some angst around that.
Mm-hmm.
How do I plan for work if I don't know if my kids are back in school or if childcare is available? How do I do that? That is a normal reaction. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you have a mental health issue.
It's kind of liberating.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope we can start to become comfortable with the range of emotions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
No one rushes through happiness. I've never heard anyone say, I'm so happy. I've been happy for way too long. When is this going to end?
Right.
Right? But the moment you feel any kind of anxiousness, anger, sadness, we're like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I've been sad for 2 days. And I'm just like,
Right.
nothing's wrong with you. If you can list all the things that's wrong and why you're feeling this way, there's nothing wrong with you. It's a natural reaction to, well, set things.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good lesson in like allowing our children to also have bad feelings too.
Oh
And
my gosh. Yes. I hear so many parents say, like, I was crying and I don't want my kids to see me cry. I don't want them. And I'm like, why? Why would you set them up that way? Can you imagine having your first encounter with different emotions at school?
mm,
I mean, what a setup,
yeah,
right? I
right.
mean, how do you expect to raise emotionally intelligent children if you don't allow them to have every emotion and name them and you don't mimic for them
Mm-hmm.
what it looks like to have these emotions and go back to baseline,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's okay if you see me cry because then you see me recover from that. It's
Right.
okay to see me angry because you see me recover from that and that there's love still there. We can have a conversation and that you don't get stuck in these spaces. If you just shut this down and you don't show them anything but joy, I can't imagine how frightening it must be to feel anything but that or to see anyone else having those feelings for the first time outside of your home.
Sorry, my sound just went out in a weird way. Is your sound okay?
I'm okay.
Okay, now it's back. Um, there was one last question. Would you say it's depression if when we get a break and enjoy it, we feel better instantly?
No.
Yeah. Based on what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about a diagnosis as something that can interfere in your day-to-day activity. Again, when we talk about depression, the main indicator is doing things that would normally bring you joy or that cognitively should bring you joy, but you don't feel anything. Anxiety is from unrealistic fears, right? And so, for example, if I have a mom who says, I can't sleep because I can't sleep when baby sleeps because I just watch my baby sleep all day because I'm so afraid of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is normal. A lot of parents say that in the beginning. Like I just watch them. I go check every hour. This is now interfering in your day to day because you're not sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing anything else. You can't function outside of this worry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we do what we call reality testing, right? Is this fear based in reality? Okay, your child is 3 months. For 3 months, every night they went to bed and every morning they woke up. What has changed?
Hmm.
Nothing, right? Are you doing everything possible to keep them safe? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this fear based in reality?
Yeah. Those are very helpful questions.
Yeah. So
So
this is when I give permission for people to talk to themselves. Question your thoughts, right? Question them. That's like kind of the best way to rage.
this is so helpful. I wish that we had spoken to you, so many of us, before we became mothers. Uh,
No.
but it's an opportunity to still revisit a lot of things and ask ourselves these questions now because there's still room for growth and I guess rethinking some firmly held beliefs.
Yeah, we talked about this the other day when everyone just feels really stuck right now, and everyone's just like, I just feel stuck. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, are you doing everything that you can? Most times it's yes. then you are doing everything you're supposed to do, right? So again, what is your expectation? And do you know anyone that has met these expectations? Who is this person that you know? And a lot of times people are like, oh, no one does this, right? And I'm like, so why do you think that you should? And for those who feel like everybody's doing something, well, everybody thinks that. Everyone's looking at everyone, thinking that everyone's doing great, and no one is. Everyone wears a mask. We don't know what people are going through. The same way you look at others and think they're doing great, they're looking at you and think that you're doing great.
Mm-hmm.
And the real reality is that 90% of the time, people are thinking about themselves.
That's true.
It's a hard reality to hear, but like, I constantly have to tell people, like, no one is thinking about you. It sounds harsh, but no one is. I mean, think about yourself right now. If I think about what did I think about today? I thought about what I was wearing. I thought about work. I thought about what I was eating. I thought about me, and if I thought about someone, I thought about someone in relation to me. That's not selfish. That is true, right? So even if I'm thinking about someone's well-being and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that person's okay. I'm only really thinking about that person because that's my friend. Because it's in relation to me. And what would I lose if I lost this person?
Right.
So this idea that people are like rubbing their hands together, super worried about your life, is just not the case. They're just not.
Mic drop.
And not because they don't have a wonderful, lovely life. It's because they have their own.
Yeah, right. They're human. Yes.
Yeah. So I always question that when people are like, well, what if that person, and you know, all the comparaholics come on and they talk about what everyone else is doing. And I'm like, do you spend this much time thinking about other people? And the answer 90% of the time is no. And so I'm like, why do you think? Where does this come from?
Right. So true. Yeah. So I want to tell people where they can find you on Instagram.
People can find me on Instagram at my name, Nneka Symister, LCSW, or they can find me on my website, mylocaltherapist.org. I'm also at Seleni Institute. I'm in a couple of places, therapy for Black girls. And so send me an email. You can DM me through my Instagram or schedule an appointment for consultation. I recommend everyone to go to therapy, obviously. I also recommended everyone interview their therapist and try to find people who give free consultations. I really think it's important for you to find the right fit and not just go to anybody just because they were recommended or you found them somewhere. It really is important for you to do the research and find the right fit if you really want to do the changes that you want to make.
Are you doing telehealth now as well?
I'm doing all telehealth. More than likely, I may not go back in person. I offered telehealth prior to COVID just because pregnant moms. Yeah. Some days you can get out, some days you can't.
Yeah.
And people with small kids, again, the option of some days you get out, some days you can't. But this has been much more helpful, I think, to my clients.
Agreed.
That may change though. So
yeah, well, I love it with therapy. It's been life-changing to not have to go.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, it's good. For some people, they need to get out the house. And so I usually recommend if you have a car, sit in your car. Some patients, they go into the park and I talk to them, they're outside just so they can have their own space. So I might open up just for that reason, for those who really need to just get a break and have something that belongs to them. But really, this is whatever's the most accessible, and this seems to be it at this time.
Great. So nice to know that you're here for the moms and for couples and for folks who really need this. We all need this.
We all need this. And I just want to say, and this is for not just birthing mothers, right? Like anyone who's starting a family, you know, whether you gave birth or not, if you're raising children, you're going through the same issues. Whether it's same sex or not, same issues. Adoption or not, same issues. You know what I mean? Fathers, you know, people don't put enough conversation around fathers suffering from PMADs, but they do.
Yeah.
I've had clients who mom was totally fine and dad was the person who was really struggling with postpartum. So just keep an eye out. Sometimes it's the spouses who are struggling and they don't know, and you don't know, to ask what's going on with them.
We definitely hear about that a lot, and people have their childhood traumas and those get resurfaced when you become a parent. It's not all about matrescence it's
Right.
for everybody.
Yeah. I really try to encourage the parents too to think a lot about the difference between parenting and intentional parenting. And what I mean by that is being intentional about the emotional welfare of your children and not just the basics of like, education and housing and things like that, but really being intentional about what you've learned, what you want to pass down, what you don't want to pass down.
Mm.
And it allows you have to really be in tune with yourself so that you're intentional about, you know, breaking generational curses and also passing down the great generational things that you've got. So really thinking about that. And that's very different than expectations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because with expectations, there's the idea of perfection. And that's not what we're trying to achieve. There's no such thing. The goal is always the good enough parent, right? We want you to be good enough. That's all. That's the only goal.
Yep.
Not perfect. But when I think about intentional parenting, you're still good enough, but you're intentional about how you're doing everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
That's a separate live.
yeah. Yeah. So we can want to talk about intentional parenting.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
Folks, you know how to find Nneka. She's I'll link to her Instagram again, and we'll post this on our IG live area on the Not Safe for Mom group. And if you have any questions, you could always ask me, and I will make sure she gets it. But definitely, if you're looking for a therapist, this is a really good one.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You know, you're like my best friend in my head. So this is really good. I'm glad that we were able to do this.
You're my new best friend.
Thank you. So hopefully we can do this again. And I just want to thank everyone for joining. And I'll see you soon.
Bye.
All right. Bye.